arrived just in time to see the trapped Soviet divisions. The 600,000 prisoners taken by the Germans remain the highest number ever captured in a single engagement.
Wow. Damn. In history? In history? Oh, wow. Wow. Alright, this guy has been asking me to do this for a while. Honestly, I kind of do need to do more World War II, more Eurocentric reactions. I can't even lie, because I've been doing a lot of different reactions. So, here we are. War stories. I hope I don't get demonetized or copyrighted, because
the invasion of the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941 was Germany's most desperate gamble of the Second World War.
I will have a lot to say about this, because I am quite knowledgeable in World War II, actually. Compared to most people. Most people, they think that they're knowledgeable about World War II, but they're really not. Like, they usually just know surface level info, but they don't really know anything deeper. But everybody thinks that they're knowledgeable in World War II, because World War II is probably like one of the most talked about historical topics. So, but yeah, not me. I'm actually quite knowledgeable in World War II.
It was a gamble Hitler felt compelled to take if his ambition of the complete subjugation of Europe were to become a reality. 4/5 of Germany's total armies, 3 million troops, were committed to the most appalling conflict in the history of warfare.
And it would have been more, a lot more, if Mr. Mustache Man didn't have to deal with a two-front war. So think about that for a second. People say 3 million troops. Bro, it was supposed to be a lot more.
In little more than 1 year, Hitler's armies had reduced vast areas of Western Russia to dust and rubble.
Alright, so really and truly, most of it wasn't really Russia. It was mostly just the Baltics and Belarus and Ukraine. But when you actually think about it, some parts of Russia did get invaded, but actual Russia kind of was more or less unscathed, kind of, except for like the Caucasus area, where yeah, but aside from like the major cities, i.e. Stalingrad, Leningrad, Moscow, I mean, Finland did invade, but they didn't even like invade. They only invaded to recapture their territory that they lost to the Soviet Union, and they just took forward defensive positions, even though they could have actually pushed further. So I wouldn't really say Western Russia, but more like the Western Soviet Union would be more accurate. But whatever.
Subjected the Soviet peoples to unimaginable brutality, while the Allies looked on.
Bro, okay. You see, this is what I mean by I have a lot to say. Okay, I was gonna say something about that, but we're like a minute in the video.
Russia was in.
I'm gonna let the video play first.
Being dragged through a nightmare of slaughter to the edge of extinction.
He means the Soviet Union. Oh my goodness. Anyone who says Soviet Union instead of Russia, I can't. That annoys me. And you might be asking yourself, what
does it annoy you so much, bruh? It's not a big deal that much, bruh.
It is because you have people who are uneducated who are going to be watching this, and when they don't understand history properly, they tend to, like, for example, we have too many people today thinking that like Russia is like still communist, right? When the Soviet Union freaking collapsed like 30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago, and Russia's capitalist, and now it's a freaking oligarchical system now, much like America. We still have people who will call you a freaking commie if you barely show any support of Russia. And it's like, what the heck? That you sound dumb. Like you sound dumb, dude. Or you have people who say, oh, Russia's trying to recreate the Soviet Union. No, this is why it's important to say Soviet Union, not Russia, because when you understand that the whole dynamic relationship within the Soviet Union, you will understand why he's saying Russia is an intellectual insult. Like, no. Freaking hell, man. But that's just an example. Like, I like that intro though. I hope it's not copyrighted. If it's copyrighted, I'm toast. If this is copyrighted, I am super toast.
In 1941, the conquest of Russia would not only have provided Germany with the agricultural and industrial supplies to ensure Hitler's mastery of Europe, it would have simultaneously rid him of the only military power capable of challenging his domination. The deaths of tens of millions of Russians was not simply an economic necessity. Their destruction would pave the way for the Großraum, a concept already under development by Heinrich Himmler as the culmination of Hitler's call for Lebensraum. The Großraum was envisaged as a gigantic Germanic state stretching from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the mountains of the Urals in the east. The Großraum would be ruled by the master race of Germans, served by the more acceptable of the subhumans within its borders, but eliminating those like the Slavs and the Jews, who were too unredeemably decadent to survive.
Demonetized. YouTube, this is just an educational documentary. He's simply just explaining things objectively. YouTube, don't demonetize the video, please.
Once established, this superstate would provide Hitler with the ideal platform for his ultimate aim: complete domination of the world. His vision was of a world...
Yeah, no. No. Yeah, no, that's wrong. Wrong. No, that's just Allied propaganda that made out that narrative that Mustache Man wanted complete domination over the world. No, that's just flat out wrong. No, he was accurate with saying the whole Mr. Mustache Man wanted to rid of the Soviet Union and establish a, you know, a greater Germanic, greater German Reich, or Großdeutsches Reich. He was right with saying that, but then as soon as he said world domination, nope. All Mr. Mustache Man cared about was getting rid of the Soviet Union and quote-unquote saving the German people from the Bolshevik menace and the Jews. I'm just saying this objectively, YouTube. I am not saying this with any intent, YouTube. So, no. Yeah, no.
World in which nationalism would cease to exist, replaced by a universal society of masters and slaves.
That is
between Hitler
that is true.
and the realization of this vision were the armies of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, a fighting force whose condition of unpreparedness paid tribute to the paranoia of its political leadership and the excesses of a state which vied with Germany in the extent of its totalitarian oppression.
The whole ideological thrust of the German plan for war, which was not just a nominal war of conquest, it was intended to be a war of extermination. It was intended first and foremost to root out what they called the Jewish Bolshevik gang who ran Russia. It was designed to destroy the political structure both of the Soviet Union and of the Red Army. So the degree of barbarization which set in at a very early stage in the Soviet-German War, the Great Patriotic War, was a feature which persisted until the very last day of that war.
While Hitler having dealt with his political opponents during the Night of the Long Knives, was by the late 30s industriously nurturing the leadership of Germany's armed forces. Stalin was busily destroying Russia's. In 1936, Tukhachevsky, chief of staff of the Russian army, was executed for treason, following a trial which lasted only a single day. 6 of the 8 generals forming the court-martial which condemned him were themselves to follow suit soon after.
Holy crap, that is hilarious. That is hilarious. Are you serious? Okay, that is funny. Oh my goodness. Oh, karma, bro. Karma. That's amazing.
The Russian army had lost 3 of the 5 remaining marshals of the Soviet Union, all 11 deputy ministers of defense, 75 of the 80 members of the military Soviet, all the commanders of the military districts, 13 of the 15 army commanders, more than half the corps commanders, and approximately 30% of the officers below brigade level. Stalin, however, controlled the balance of power in Europe. And when a German-Soviet non-aggression pact was announced in August 1939, the world was shocked. Cynically burying their ideological differences, Fascist Germany and Communist Russia agreed to take no military action against one another for the next 10 years. In a secret additional protocol, they also agreed to divide the independent states of Eastern Europe between them.
So, when I was writing my script for Operation Sea Lion, right? This is something that I will say here. People tend to say, oh, Germany couldn't win World War II. Well, nah. I'm not going to say here. I'm not going to say here. I'd rather wait until I release that video on why Operation Sea Lion may have been possible. You see, I'm like kind of waiting. I've been talking about this video for a bit. If you are a long viewer of mine, you watch my World War II stuff. The reason why I haven't really bothered dropping it is because I want to make sure I have enough people watching me first, right? It's kind of the reason why I haven't pivoted my content too much yet, right? I need to make sure I have enough people watching me before I do stuff like that. But let's continue. It's crazy how I'm watching all dead people right now. All of these people dead.
The Soviet Union then threatened the Baltic states with invasion unless they allowed Soviet armies to be stationed within their borders. The Balts had little option but to comply. Rigged plebiscites gave a gloss of legitimacy to this invasion. Stalin now controlled eastern Poland and Galicia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia.
Oh my gosh, bad maps. Oh, that's a bad sign.
Stalin's overall strategy was to create a barrier of Russian territory between the Soviet Union and Germany. Snug behind this defensive wall, he planned to allow the Allies to fight a mutually destructive war in the West. 1 year later, however, Stalin's hopes of a protracted war seemed to have evaporated with the brilliant success of Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics. 20 to 100 miles per hour slower than the Messerschmitt 109s were constantly outfought. Many of them never got the opportunity of aerial combat. The Luftwaffe claimed to have destroyed 1,500 aircraft on the ground during the first day of Barbarossa.
That was the Luftwaffe crippled after the Battle of Britain, by the way. Remember what I said earlier in the video?
On the ground, chaos reigned. The Luftwaffe were pulverizing the road and rail links behind the Russian lines. Many officers were not even bothering to use code in their desperate pleas for instructions from their headquarters. Struggling masses of uncoordinated troops were being slaughtered by the German troops as they attempted to obey Stalin's orders to counterattack. Others were being machine-gunned by their own military police for fleeing from positions worse than hopeless.
Whoa. Oh, whoa. Ugh. Ugh. My goodness. Golly. Golly, man.
The reality was that they were left leaderless. First of all, they really had no orders. Sometimes they had guns but no ammunition. Sometimes they had on many occasions they had tanks but no fuel, or they had tanks which broke down, or they had orders which were contradictory. And there was the usual situation whereby the order simply was advance. What do you mean advance against crack German divisions? And many of the Red Army divisions simply broke up. And what you got were very large pockets of Red Army troops. For example, within a matter of 4 or 5 days, the Wehrmacht, the German army in the east, had managed to encircle 350,000 Red Army soldiers. 350,000. That was the first of the beginning, actually, of a number of huge encirclements.
By the 3rd of July, the battle for the frontier was over. The German armies had advanced along a line from the river Dvina in the north to the Dnieper in the south. General Halder, chief of German General Staff, declared that the war against the Soviet Union had taken only 14 days to win. But the German intelligence had totally underestimated the reserves which Russia could command.
Yep. Big reason why, another big reason that nobody seems to point out why Germany actually lost World War II. Their intelligence was horrendous. Like, I see everybody pointing out, oh, if Germany did this, they would win. If Germany did that, they would win. Dude, if German intelligence was actually competent, I'm pretty sure they actually would have won. German intelligence completely failed them in the Battle of Britain, and German intelligence completely failed them in D-Day, and German intelligence completely failed them within Barbarossa. Okay? It's ridiculous.
By July the 1st, 5,300,000 men had been mobilized. Stalin had emerged from his isolation to broadcast a message of patriotism and resistance to the nation.
And Stalin was cooking, bruh. Stalin was cooking.
The Russian people were told the truth. The pre-war complacency which Stalin had done so much to foster had now rapidly to be undone. In Leningrad, when news of war reached the factories, the general consensus was that it would be over within the week. Well, it won't necessarily be over in a week, one Russian worker was reported as saying. It will take them 3 or 4 weeks to get to Berlin. Stalin now took direct control of the Red Army.
He's from Leningrad too. Oh, if only he knew. Oh, I think he knew. He probably died eventually, but...
But the general mobilization of Russian troops failed to curtail the German advance. 4 reserve armies of 37 divisions were dispatched to bolster West Front in the general area of Smolensk. The Germans countered with yet another encirclement, and the panzer groups of Generals Hoth and Guderian smashed through the Soviet line and maneuvered 300,000 Russian troops into an indefensible pocket. Another 150,000 prisoners, 2,000 tanks and 2,000 artillery pieces fell into German hands. Goebbels announced that the eastern continent lies like a limp virgin in the mighty arms of the German Mars. Army Group South finally broke through the Russian southwest front, and another pocket yielded a further toll of 100,000 prisoners.
Now, the scale of these encirclements, 500,000 men, and by the last week in November, Red Army strength dropped to a level which was its lowest during the war, because the Germans had taken 3.1 million prisoners. 3.1 million prisoners is an enormous number. Indeed, that was basically the pre-war Red Army destroyed. More than 30 divisions had been completely wiped out. What astonished the Germans, of course, was as these divisions were literally wiped out from the order of battle, more and more divisions took their place. And while the Germans were calculating on the fact that they thought they knew the Russian order of battle, what came as an astonishing and disturbing shock to them was that more and more divisions are coming into the line, not always fully manned, but the Russian order of battle was in fact being steadily built up.
Partially thanks to Japan enabling Russia to, or should I say the Soviet Union, to, with that non-aggression pact, to send reinforcements westward and not really having to man the Far East.
The devastating speed of the German advance was due to the power and tactical brilliance of its panzer divisions. The concept of an integrated armour force had intrigued the German military since the close of the First World War. By the early 30s, 10 prototype tanks had been designed and built in secret. Ironically, the initial development of what would become the most technically accomplished and cost-effective tank program ever seen took place at the German-Soviet tank school at Kazan in Russia.
I have heard of this.
At the outbreak of war in the East, the backbone of the Panzer Corps was the Panzer Mark IV. Designed by Krupp and weighing 17.3 tons, the Panzer Kampfwagen IV carried a crew of 5 at a maximum speed of 18.5 miles per hour. Its armour varied in thickness from 8 to 30 centimetres, and it was armed with a 75mm turret gun and 2 machine guns. Supported by the lighter Mark III, which was similar in size and appearance, the Mark IV swept all before it, until the Russian T-34 tank made its appearance in numbers.
What the Russians had tried to do in between 1940 and 45 was to bring in 2 new tanks, the T-34, which actually was the tank which had been tested in 39, and the rather heavier tank, the Klim-Voroshilov. But they'd only produced about 1,000 of each. So therefore, these T-34s were distributed in very small packets. And remember, the battlefront is about 2,000 miles long, so yeah. 1,000 tanks. On the other hand, it did come as an enormous shock the first time that the Germans encountered the T-34, because the T-34's armour, mobility, speed, and gunpowder was something they simply hadn't suspected. And Guderian, as you will remember, actually, in November 1941, ran into a T-34 ambush and was completely destroyed.
Russian armoured warfare was inhibited by Stalin's disenchantment with tank divisions, which had led him in the 30s to utilize his armour only in the support of infantry formations. After witnessing German successes on the Western Front, Stalin changed his mind. But the reorganization of Russian armour was not completed before the launch of Barbarossa. Even though Russian tanks outnumbered German 2-to-1 at the front and 6-to-1 overall, tactical ineffectiveness, obsolete models and widespread disrepair tipped the advantage overwhelmingly in favour of Germany during the first stages of the conflict.
But it wasn't just the quality of the German tank, it was the capability of the panzer commanders to do with their armour what was essential. That is, they had excellent command and control facilities. At that time they had very good support logistical facilities. And indeed, essentially they knew what they were doing. So that although German Mark II tanks and 3s might run up against a huge Elephantine Klim-Voroshilov tank, the KV-1, the big heavy tank, and German shells might bounce off them. Nonetheless, such was the, I must say, the haphazard and untrained manner in which the Russians handled their armour anyway, that the Germans soon made short meat of them.
There's no other way I could have done it.
Victorious progress, the German High Command were disconcerted by the rapidity of their own advance. Their armies were now fighting on a front 1,000 miles wide. The Stukas could no longer deliver the concerted hammer blows which had punched the holes in the Russian lines, which the panzers had so mercilessly exploited. Even though the Soviet Air Force had by now lost approximately 5,000 aircraft, the supply of replacements seemed endless. The factories in the east which were churning out more effective fighter models, were out of Luftwaffe bombing range.
Oh yeah. Again, you know, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. The factories in the east, they did. If Stalin hadn't moved those factories, yeah, they would have 100% lost. 100%. I'm very much well aware of the Soviet factories in the east, okay? Because I always get, whenever I talk about Lend-Lease, I always get from people like, oh, but the Soviet factories in the east. Like, I'm aware. I am very much aware. Don't get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. I was just saying that Lend-Lease helped the Soviets recovered quicker and not just completely all out collapsed, right?
The German air assault began to run low on fighters. The Luftwaffe also had serious supply problems. The distance from home base and the destruction of the transport infrastructure meant that aircraft replacement parts had to be flown to forward airfields. The lengthening supply lines were also affecting the German ground forces. Tank commanders, hundreds of miles from their Polish depots, nevertheless pressed for the final thrust toward Moscow. They argued that only the continuation of the offensive would prevent the Russians from organizing a fresh line of resistance.
And that's the thing, it's like the Soviet Union is just too big. And not only that, but that's not really the main reason. The main reason that the Germans didn't plan properly. They just did not plan that whole thing out properly.
Hitler's
it's
generals
mind-blowing
that such an attack should be launched immediately. They were almost unanimous in recommending that Moscow should become the primary objective of the next phase of the war. Hitler, on the other hand, was worried about the possibility of the gaps between the panzer divisions and the main armies being exploited by Russian reinforcements.
Rightfully
He
so.
also feared that the hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops left behind the German lines in the wake of the advance might coordinate their actions into an effective guerrilla movement. According to the account of one witness to the disarray behind the German advance, he need hardly have worried. One Russian soldier reported, "Thousands of mobilized men from various places which have already been captured and from near the frontline zone roam from place to place. They lack any purpose, any sense of order. They have no uniforms. 20% are barefoot.
Woo!
The leaders are leaving, and they are abandoning us to ruin." Hitler had never been fully convinced of the importance of Moscow and continued to regard it as a secondary objective. The debate stretched out until mid-August. A vital month of summer weather was wasted.
Ooh. Whoa, again, the German High Command. This is why I say the German High Command just completely, again, this goes back to my point of why Germany lost World War II when they had it in the bag. The German High Command just were not doing their job as a high command. And to be fair, though, I actually kind of agree with the dictator. Moscow wasn't really important. It was not. Sure, it had the railway network, which would have crippled the Soviet Union. But what you're trying to avoid is Germany starving. You need Ukraine and you need the Caucasus oil fields so that you could actually deal with a long, protracted war. And not only that, but when you take the Caucasus, you also cut off another logistic supply line, right? Because the Allies were sending aid through the Caucasus as well by Iran. So, yeah, I mean, he was actually right. The High Command was just absolutely wrong with that one there. I mean,
The Russians had the breathing space to throw reserve divisions into the gaps in their defences. Barely trained, poorly equipped, some in the battered remnants of their civilian clothing, their stubborn ferocity meant that they were still a force to be reckoned with.
I mean, yeah, numbers are numbers.
To crush Russia should have been over by August, wasn't. They had to think again, and the first thing, of course, that they had to think about were logistics and supply. No great preparation had been made for a winter campaign in Russia. The second thing was that the German High Command and German intelligence and the German military as a whole had vastly underestimated the ability of the Red Army to resist. Their aim was to destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper, but they hadn't done whatever they did to the Red Army, and they battered it mercilessly. They didn't destroy it. It was still basically there at the end of December.
Yep.
And when you compare both the Red Army and the German Army at that time, you will see the Germans pushing their very last battalion down to the line. And the Red Army on the other side is desperately trying to push its final and important reserves into position as well. So it was two armies which were desperately stretched. But in terms of, if you like, survivability, in terms of responsiveness, the Red Army just had the edge. Only just, but they had that vital and important edge.
I feel like Germany's plan would have worked to have Japan not sign that treaty, allowing Russia to send those reinforcements to Western Soviet Union. I keep saying Russia. I meant Soviet Union because this video keeps saying Russia. So it's freaking confusing my head. I mean the Soviet Union, guys. But also, the other issue is that Germany just didn't have a plan B. Germany just put all his eggs in one basket, and then it became clear that it wasn't working. And then Germany didn't know what to do afterwards. And that was it. From the moment that Germany didn't know what to do afterwards, that was basically it.
Eventually, the generals were silenced, and two major objectives were prioritized: the capture of Leningrad and the fall of the Ukraine. A giant pincer movement involving half of Army Group Center and the left flank of Army Group South began to close its jaws on a huge pocket of Russian forces to the rear of Kiev. Field Marshal Zhukov, the Soviet Chief of Staff, pleaded with Stalin for a strategic withdrawal of the troops defending the city. He was dismissed from his post. Marshal Timoshenko, the newly appointed Southwest commander, arrived just in time to see the trapped Soviet divisions. The 600,000 prisoners taken by the Germans remain the highest number ever captured in a single engagement.
Wow. Damn. In history? In history? Oh, wow. Wow. That is crazy.
The battle for the Ukraine now centered on the Crimean Peninsula, where the right flank of Army Group South pressed the Soviet 51st Army back towards Sebastopol. While half of the German Group Center were engaged in subduing the Ukraine, Marshal Zhukov, transferred to the reserve forces behind West Front, seized the opportunity to attack the German Fourth Army. Occupying a salient near Smolensk, the Germans were now themselves vulnerable to encirclement. The Fourth Army were thrown back 12 kilometers, but without sufficient tanks and aircraft, Zhukov failed to tighten the noose he had made. However, in terms of morale, Zhukov's counter-thrust was highly significant. His action was the first substantial Soviet counterattack of the war. Hitler's response was to regroup Army Group Center and prepare the most critical operation of the campaign. Operation Typhoon, the drive towards Moscow, was finally underway. 70 divisions, spearheaded by 1,500 tanks, would race toward the Russian capital before the rains of autumn or the snows of winter could halt their progress. On September the 30th, General Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group almost inevitably broke through the Soviet line and had encircled the defending Bryansk front by the 6th of October. Simultaneously, the Western Front, commanded by Marshal Timoshenko, fell into a similar trap. The pockets of Vyazma and Bryansk, containing 9 armies of 71 divisions, were almost completely destroyed. Another 660,000 troops faced the grim hospitality that the German army meted out to prisoners of war, and the road to Moscow lay open. In the Baltics, by the 16th of August, von Lieb's Army Group North had captured the city of Novgorod, a vital target in the approach to Leningrad. The beleaguered defenders had fought to the death, following the German discovery of the city's defensive plans on the corpse of a Soviet officer.
Oh, that's so unfortunate.
General Hauptner's 4th Panzer Group resumed its drive towards Leningrad, but without supporting infantry, its progress was limited. Leningrad was a vital center of the wartime production industry, and reserves and equipment were poured into the defense of the city. The citizens themselves formed into militia, divisions which were flung against the Germans more in despair than hope. Following a basic training period, averaging 16 hours, the 1st Militia Division was sent to the front 6 days after being formed, the 2nd 2 days, and the 3rd the same day it was established.
There certainly was a surge of patriotism, but there was also, as the war went on, a deepening vengeful feeling, a feeling of revenge. And there was also a sense, and I think whatever artificiality there may be about it, it is true, there was a sense of the kind of morality of this. This is something you had to do. Well, why otherwise did you get kids of 14 working 12, 14 hours a day in ammunition plants? Why did you get a lot of these extraordinary sacrifices on the part of ordinary people who didn't have to do it, and yet under a really ferocious Soviet system which either abandoned the population or brutally coerced them? I mean, they were caught between 2 fires. I do remember talking to one senior Soviet officer and asking him what really happened in terms of a choice. He said, we were faced with a choice between 2 dictators, Hitler on the one hand and Stalin on the other, but we preferred to pick the one who spoke Russian.
Despite such gargantuan
so true.
efforts, the first shells began to pour down on Leningrad early in September. With the arrival of the 18th Army to reinforce the panzers on the 8th, the German stranglehold on the city tightened further. The capture of Schlüsselburg to the east signaled the end of rail transport. When Marshal Zhukov arrived to take over the defense of the city on the 10th of September, he found the defenders in an advanced state of disorganization and the inhabitants close to panic. Undaunted, he briskly set about bolstering its defenses. A shortage of anti-tank guns was dealt with by converting anti-aircraft artillery to the task of attempting to halt the panzers. 6 brigades of naval infantry and students were formed, and reinforcements drafted in from the Karelian Isthmus. Zhukov began to take the fight to the Germans through raids and counterattacks. But by now the German troops had pierced the inner circle of defences and were rampaging through the suburbs. After a furious exchange of advances and retreats, at the end of the month the defenders were still hanging onto their city by their fingernails. It seemed inevitable that Leningrad would capitulate. But as Zhukov awaited a renewed assault, the 4th Panzer Group suddenly departed to join the battle for Moscow, and the remaining German forces began to build defenses.
Now, again, was this a good idea? Was this a good idea? Because on the one hand, the dictator of Germany, he just saw Leningrad as way too big to operate and to occupy. That's why he kind of just didn't really want to take the city. But on the other hand, it's like you kind of have to take the city because you need to free up troops, right? So again, when it seemed like the Germans had it in the bag, the high command messed things up again, right? You could argue that, right? But you could give a good argument that Leningrad was just too big to take. You could say that. So again, this pattern of Germany having things in the bag and ruining it, it keeps happening over and over and over, and it just plagues them. It plagues them until the very end of the war, really and truly.
Leningrad would not now be taken by force. It would be starved into submission.
All normal rules of warfare, insofar as they apply, were abandoned. And this applied on both sides. For example, as the Soviet partisan movement grew up, then the war became very savage. But I have asked many, many Russians, whom I know very well, really, what really happened? I mean, why did the war change? And basically their explanation was this: both soldiers and civilians, and indeed many of my contemporaries, they said in the first 3 months of the war, that's from June until December, it seemed to be a war like anything else. They realized something terrible had happened. And they heard the Soviet government's statements about German atrocities, but they didn't really believe them. But when the survivors came back into Soviet territory and told the real truth about what was happening, I mean the ghastliness of this, then it suddenly dawned on the Russians that something quite unbelievably terrible had happened. And then you get a change in Russian propaganda, not just government propaganda, not just Stalin on the July the 3rd, 1941, beginning his broadcast, brothers and sisters, and half the Soviet population nearly fainted, I mean, coming from Stalin. Then you get propaganda about kill. You get propaganda about destroy the Germans. You get propaganda about really the full ferocity of this kind of thing on a purely personal basis. It is your responsibility. I mean, I've talked to women soldiers in the Red Army who were tank commanders, who served in artillery battalions, and you ask them, why did you go? Women, why were you there? Why were you handling 100-pound shells, manning anti-aircraft guns? Because they said, my mother and father said you should go.
And that was what really messed the Germans up. That's another reason why Germany kind of fumbled extremely hard in the East. I mean, their arrogance just got the best of them. Yes, guys, let's go commit atrocities whilst we're in the middle of an all-out total war. Yeah, I'm totally not gonna make the enemy fight harder, right? Like Ukraine, for example. Bro, the Ukrainians literally hailed the Germans as liberators, right? And when it became clear what the Germans were doing, the Ukrainians just were like, yeah, no, we're not gonna they chose the Soviets over the Germans because the Soviets was the lesser devil between the two, right? Again, it just blows your mind just how much the Germans truly had it in the bag. Germany easily could have tamed Ukraine much more better had, I don't know, if they just simply waited until the whole war was over before they started their policies. But no, they decided that, no, we're going to implement our policies whilst we're in the middle of a war. Which is absurd. I mean, who does that, really and truly? Like, think about it. Who does that? It's more logical to do it after you're done.
The German invaders controlled all of Western Russia on a line from Leningrad in the north.
Soviet Union, please say Soviet Union. Stop saying Russia. Stop saying Russia. Stop saying Russia. It was Soviet Union. Soviet Union.
To Rostov on the Black Sea, and the Red Army was still retreating before them. The countryside they left behind was a wasteland. The first few months of the war had robbed the nation of nearly 50% of her grain-producing lands.
Right. Again, going back to Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease really stopped the Soviet Union from going into a food shortage. Okay, a lot of people tend to overlook how important the fact that Germany literally took like a lot of the Soviets' grain supply. Okay, like that, had Lend-Lease not been there, that would have been crippling. right? You know, just again, just reminding you, right? Because I need people to have a better understanding of this, because way too many times I see people discuss this topic and they think they know everything and they just completely forget things like that, right?
Where the armies had fallen back, vast tracts of crops lay ruined in the fields. The rotting carcasses of livestock, slaughtered to deprive the Germans of food, mingled their stench with the corpses of soldiers and peasants.
Ooh.
Villages, tumbled into ruins, became the silent memorials of their former inhabitants. The mangled wreckage of sabotaged industries smouldered beneath the skies. Amid the ruin, thousands of starving, orphaned children searched vainly for their parents. But the fighting spirit of the Russians was far from crushed. It had been inflamed by accounts of the slaughter of prisoners of war and the murder and torture committed by the German invaders. Even the constant series of military reverses failed to dampen the ardor of defenders whose motherland had been ravaged.
Their system wasn't perfect. It had sacrificed millions of men. It wasn't all that efficient.
Yeah, and you know, you get a bunch of people who don't even support the Soviet Union. Like, they weren't even fighting for the Soviet Union. They were just fighting for survival at that point. And that's such a good propaganda to sell. Remember, guys, propaganda isn't lies. Okay, people think propaganda is lies. No, propaganda can be simply exaggeration, or it could just be plain out truth. It could just be actually truth. But, you know, it's just easy propaganda to sell at that point. Like, defend or die. Simple as that. I mean, defend or be slaughtered. Simple as that. Again, and this is how the Germans blundered in the East again. Just mindlessly committing atrocities that they really did not need to do. They did not need to do. Right? And because of this, you know, you just make the enemies fight harder. When had you treated the person as much more better and whatnot. I mean, because like he said, the Soviet population didn't even believe what the Soviet propaganda machine was saying about the atrocities at first, right? I mean, that's what he said, right? It wasn't until the actual survivors came that people were like, oh, this is a lot worse. Like, again, just repeating what the video said, because I'm pointing out the many mistakes that Germany did that they shouldn't have done, because I do believe Germany could have won in the East. They just did a whole bunch of nonsensical mistakes that didn't even have any practicality to them or a logical sense to them. Let's continue.
But when it was all boiled down, what are they left with? I mean, this barbarous, murderous, genocidal regime which exploited the country, and even more, actually. And this is a point which has never much been explored, but which actually humiliated the Russians, denigrated them as a people. And this coming from the Germans, whom they'd always respected as Beethoven, Goethe, Heine. What kind of people were these? It wasn't just the SS. It was the whole German impress of this, which I think shocked the Russians tremendously. It's also a shock from which I think they haven't recovered even to this day.
Who could have
foreseen? Yeah. I mean, dude, even since ancient times, I mean, Germanic tribes and Slavic tribes have always like intermingled. I kind of low-key had a connection with each other, so you know.
That the seat of
no, I know Slavic isn't Russian. Duh. I'm just pointing out that Russian Germans have. But I always had a connection. I mean, the people who would create the first Rus state, some of them had Germanic origin, right? So, you know, yeah, it is shocking.
Leningrad was not the final stage of a bitter struggle that would bring Hitler domination over the Soviets and Europe. Only in later years could it be recognized as the first move in a conflict of inhumane savagery that had brought Russia to the edge of annihilation, but which eventually led to one of Hitler's greatest failures, the total collapse of the Großraum.
If you made it all the way to the end of this video, make sure you like and subscribe. If you like what I have to say, definitely subscribe for that reason. Go check out my other reactions. If you have any suggestions to me, by the way, go comment it down below, and eventually I will do it. Make sure you just like the video too as well. Go check out my other World War II reactions, man. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.